Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very informative webinar with the National Science Foundation. My name is Lizette Ruiz, and I'm an Outreach and Grants Representative for the Office of Congresswoman Veronica Escobar. We would like to thank our panelists and presenters who are here today, Jeremy Leffler and Erwin Gyanchandani. I will turn it over to them to start their presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lizette. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeremy Leffler. I'm happy to be here, talk to you for a little bit, and perhaps answer some of your questions as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of our overall position, NSF's role, our funding, our organization, and kind of what our processes are. And then I'm going to turn it over to Erwin, and he's going to get into a little bit more details about some other things here. So if we go to the next slide. So NSF as an agency, our mission, according to our Organic Act, is to promote the progress of science to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. And we do that by supporting investments across a wide range of science and engineering areas. And my job in the next few minutes really is to give you an overview of NSF, what we fund, what the processes are, and where you can find out more information about how to submit a proposal to NSF. So I've worked at NSF for over 18 years in the policy office, and our office, among other things, is responsible for putting out NSF policies and guidance, for preparing and submitting proposals, and for managing NSF awards. And we put on entire conferences for what I'm about to tell you in the next 15 minutes. So just know that this is an abridged version, and there are a lot of resources out there for you to get more information on how to prepare and submit your proposal, as well as resources to help you understand what makes a good proposal. Next slide, please. So we are unique among federal agencies in the sense that we support nearly every discipline of science and engineering, with the exception of medical research, which, as you know, is largely supported by the National Institutes of Health. We're a discipline-based organization, and that means we're organized like many of the institutions that receive NSF funding. We're organized into a set of directorates and offices that you see here. The directorates correspond to different areas of science and engineering, from the biological sciences to engineering to mathematical and physical sciences and so forth. And then we have some other offices like our Office of Integrative Activities and our Office of International Science and Engineering. That office supports collaborations with partners abroad. NSF also funds a lot of cross-disciplinary programs, and you'll see that many NSF funding opportunities include close collaborations among the directorates and disciplines identified here as partners in funding basic research. We're also a unique agency in that we use what we call rotators to come and work at NSF. And rotators are experts from the scientific community that come to work at NSF for a few years to run the programs in their disciplines and their fields. And then that helps strengthen the relationship between NSF and the communities that we support. They can also be great resources for you at your institutions because they will have seen the process from the inside. And they can help you understand what makes a good proposal and how that proposal might be viewed by reviewers. Next slide. So the numbers that you see here are from fiscal year 2021. That's the most recent fiscal year that's been completed, and NSF in that year had a budget of $8.5 billion. And of that, 94% of those funds were in research and education activities. In 2020, we supported about 2,000 organizations and over 300,000 people. We received about 43,000 proposals and made about 12,000 awards. So this means that NSF declined about 30,000 proposals last year, and many of those were declined due to a lack of funds rather than failing to meet NSF standards. Awards are determined through a merit review process regarded as the gold standard of scientific review. It relies on the expertise of scientists to ensure that all NSF projects are of the highest quality, have the potential to advance the frontiers of knowledge and transform our world. And NSF reviews have always been focused on the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. You can also see here by our last count that NSF supported researchers have received 248 Nobel Prizes, and NSF invested in those laureates' basic research long before they were recognized by the Nobel Committee. Next slide, please. So this slide shows NSF support of academic basic research, only basic research and only in academic institutions. And this is just federal funding. So you'll see that for a discipline like computer science, for example, NSF is one of the few places in the federal government that supports basic research in that field. NSF is a major federal funding source for academic basic research, and many government organizations work to ensure that the US leads in research and innovation. And NSF partners with many other agencies, as well as other organizations and with industry on research initiatives. And Erwin's going to be talking a little bit more about this in the second part of this presentation. Next slide, please. So what you see here, this is a rough timeline of the process for proposal submission and review. And this includes the processing, the handling, review, the decision, the recommendation, all the way through to an award or a decline. So if you look along the bottom, you see the timeline for the entire process. There are a lot of nuts and bolts and nuances built into this that we don't really have the time to get in today, but I do want to highlight a few things. And keep in mind that there are always more resources for you at NSF to dive into more about this process, and I'm certainly happy to help you locate some of those resources if you're interested. So NSF announces a funding opportunity. You see that on the top left. And along the bottom, you'll see that NSF gives proposers a minimum of 90 days to prepare and submit a proposal. The NSF program office then does an amount of compliance checking, and that's compliance checking that our systems aren't able to do on the front end when you submit your proposal. And then that proposal gets assigned to reviewers. Now, there are a number of ways in which reviews are done at NSF. They can be done by a panel of experts that come to NSF to discuss the proposals, or at least they came to NSF prior to the pandemic to discuss proposals. Currently, I guess all panel reviews are being held virtually. Proposals can also be sent out to individual reviewers, and these are what we call ad hoc reviews. Or there may be a combination of both of these types of reviews, panel reviews and ad hoc reviews. There are some instances where internal review by NSF staff also occurs, and this depends on the type of program or the funding mechanism that's happening. NSF doesn't reject proposals outright. So if your proposal makes it through the compliance check process, it will be assigned to reviewers. Proposals, rather, are declined based on input during the review process. And NSF encourages you in almost every case to try again, to learn from the process, to revise your proposal and resubmit it. The program office then collects the reviews and makes a recommendation to either fund or decline the proposal. And this is where the program officer has the ability to make decisions not strictly on the recommendations of the reviews or the reviewers, but they can also take other considerations into that process as well. And I'm going to touch on that a bit more in a little bit as well. This process from receipt of the proposal to recommendation of an award or decline can take up to 6 months, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, depending on the program, the number of proposals reviewed for a given program. So after the program officer makes a recommendation to the division director, a division director will either concur or not with that recommendation. If the concurrence is for an award, then the proposal is sent to our Division of Grants and Agreements, where they can take up to 30 more days to make the actual award. An important thing to keep in mind is that that award is made to the organization that submitted the proposal and not to the individual principal investigator. And what this slide does not show is the requirements that you have once you receive an award from NSF. And that includes a number of reporting requirements and other notifications that I really don't have the time to get into today. Just know that there are more. Just once you receive an award from NSF, your relationship with us does not end. Next slide, please. So to learn all about the process that I just described, you need to become familiar with the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or the PAPPG, or the PAPP Guide. This contains all of the requirements for preparing a proposal and what you need to include, how you format the proposal, what the review requirements are, and then it outlines, once you receive that award from NSF, what are your obligations to report on what you've done. Another thing to keep in mind is that NSF updates this document annually. Typically, we announce the changes that we anticipate making in the spring, and then there's a public comment period announced in the Federal Register. NSF then publishes a revised PAPP guide in October with an implementation date 90 days later, usually in January. So we are right in the middle of that process now, again, for next year. And we anticipate that there will be an announcement of a new PAPP guide in October with an implementation date in January of 2023. The thing to know when you see this guide is that we identify all of the significant changes and clarifications up front so that you'll know exactly what NSF's expectations are and the changes that we've made from year to year. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've read the PAPP guide, you've memorized the PAPP guide, and now you're looking for funding opportunities. So all NSF funding opportunities, they tell you what NSF wants to see. You'll use the PAPP guide to prepare your proposal while focusing on the goal of the program, making sure that your institution or that you as a principal investigator are eligible for funding for that program. And you're looking to see if there are special proposal preparation requirements that are identified in that funding opportunity that may actually supplement the guidance that is outlined in the PAPP guide. So I'll give you an example. Some funding opportunities may restrict the types of institutions that are eligible to submit proposals. They might restrict how many proposals your institution can submit. And this is important information to know up front, because if that's the case, your institution might have to have an internal competition to determine which proposal is going to go forward. A funding opportunity might have additional review criteria. So you want to make sure that you are reading the funding opportunity and you're familiar with all of the requirements as you're preparing your proposal. Next slide, please. So these are reminders when preparing proposals, and some of these may seem a little obvious to you, but our experience is that even the most obvious things can occasionally be skipped. So again, as I just mentioned, read the opportunity that you're submitting your proposal to. And this may seem obvious, but we do get questions that could have been answered if you read the funding opportunity carefully. If you're not sure, ask us for clarification. It's never a mistake to ask a program officer to explain to you what is meant by something in that funding opportunity. And all of our contact information, our emails, our phone numbers are listed on the NSF website. And within the funding opportunities themselves, you'll see the names, emails, and phone numbers of the cognizant program officers. The opportunity will include review criteria, the standard NSF review criteria, and it may have additional review criteria for that opportunity. You want to make sure your proposal addresses all of them. You want to understand the merit review process. How do you do that? Read the funding opportunity, read the PAPP guide, and perhaps one of the most important things you can do is to volunteer to become a reviewer for NSF. NSF is always looking for subject matter experts to help us through this process. And by doing so, you'll really get a front row seat to the process to see what makes a good proposal. Try not to make mistakes or typos. Now, this sounds obvious, but it is important. Have others read your proposal before it's submitted. You might be thinking, well, I don't want to share this idea with somebody else before I submit it to NSF. Well, what do you think the first thing is that we're going to do with it? We're going to give it to other people to read. So have a colleague, have other people read your proposal and give you feedback. You can also make sure that what you submitted is what we appear to have received. So you can view your proposal, you can print it to see what it looks like after NSF has received it, or even before you submitted it, and make sure that you are submitting what you intend to submit. Next slide, please. So NSF has merit review criteria, which are used by reviewers to assess the quality and the benefits of a particular project. The two review criteria are the intellectual merit and broader impacts. The intellectual merit, as the name implies, looks at the potential to advance knowledge. That's the technical piece of it, the scientific part of it. The broader impacts criteria looks at the potential of the project's activities to benefit society at large and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. I'd recommend that you become familiar with this section of the PAPP guide because it will tell you also the principles by which NSF reviewers and program staff are using to guide them as they determine whether to recommend your proposal for funding. Next slide, please. So what are some of the reasons for funding a competitive proposal? This is not a complete list, but these are some things that you should consider. Does the proposal address all of the review criteria? Will it likely have a high impact in the field? Program officers are looking at the potential impact of the proposal and the balance across the different fields. They look, for example, at the potential for the proposal to enhance and broaden participation of underrepresented groups in that particular field, and look at the educational impact, as well as the impact on the institution and the state. There are certain programs that are treated differently, uniquely. The career program, for example, is targeted towards expanding early career faculty. There's the RUI program that is targeting undergraduate institutions, and the F-score program, which is targets certain subsets of states that have less funding overall compared to the other states. These programs have special concentrations and criteria for what may be considered for an award. Program officers look at other support that the PI currently has. So say you have two proposals, both are equally good in some sense, all things being equal. And the only difference is one principal investigator is extremely well funded and the other PI has no current support whatsoever. So NSF may end up going in favor of the PI who has no or little support, with the hopes that the other person could be funded by other means. And this obviously certainly depends on the specific proposal and the reviews that came out of or from looking at that proposal and other proposals. There's always the concept of, are we taking a risk in the new area? Are we furthering research in this other area? This is the kind of the launching versus maintaining the status quo. And we can look at this balance as well in a program officer's portfolio overall. The program officer has to weigh all of these in context before making a decision. And so therefore, if you have very good reviews that you think are very promising and you get a proposal that was declined, it will help for you to kind of reach out to that program officer to understand what is it that you could have done better, or what are the factors that went into why your proposal was not funded. And then you want to look at those and determine how can I take this advice and make my proposal better and resubmit it to NSF. So I've kind of given you in a very short amount of time a lot of information. But I hope it's at least a start to get you thinking about what you need to be able to get started in terms of working with NSF. And again, there are a lot of resources through the NSF website to help you do that. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Erwin, and he is going to pick it up from here.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeremy. And as Jeremy said, it's great to be with you all this afternoon, and we really appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about some of our activities at the National Science Foundation. So Jeremy just spent the first part of this presentation outlining for you a little bit more about NSF as context setting, and also a bit about how folks can go about thinking about submitting proposals to the foundation in response to a variety of different programmatics. What I thought I would do for the second half of this webinar is try to whet your appetite a little bit in terms of some of the programs that we do have, particularly ones that we see intersecting with local communities and different regions across the country as well. So this slide really is meant to illustrate a bit about NSF's priorities today. Jeremy talked about our mission, and we continue with that mission to advance the state of progress in science across the country. But as we do so, about a year and a half ago, Director Sethuraman Panchanathan arrived at the agency. He's a presidential appointee, and he laid out three key pillars of emphasis for the foundation as we look to the future. And those include advancing science and technology to really be able to address national and societal needs. That is to say, how do we address some of the challenges that we face in communities across the country, whether it be some of the climate issues that we're facing or some of the critical infrastructure issues that we're facing, and so on. Also, thinking about ways in which we can ensure that we're really harnessing the geography of innovation, as we call it, across the country. How do we enable anyone, anywhere in the US to be able to engage in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? And then finally, what are the steps that we can take as an agency to help support the science and engineering enterprise across the country so that we can help continue to maintain and enhance the US competitiveness in science and engineering areas, but also at the same time demonstrate our global leadership together with allies all around the world as well. So with that as context, I wanted to set the stage a little bit for some of the programmatics that I'm going to talk about, because they all sort of fall under the purview of thinking about some of those societal challenges that we're facing today. I think many of us would argue, I hope you would agree with this too, that as we look across the country, we are really in a pivotal moment. We're in a pivotal moment for a number of different reasons. And on this slide, we're highlighting three key examples. One has to do with climate change, which really is impacting all different parts of the country in various ways. You see that in the form of wildfires on the West Coast, disastrous hurricanes that have come into Texas, some of the tornadoes that we saw late in the fall of last year across portions of the Midwest as well. We've also seen, I think, particularly prominently over the last 2 years of this pandemic, inequities that exist in terms of access to education, access to healthcare, even access to critical information through the web in terms of underserved and underrepresented communities when it comes to broadband connectivity. And then finally, a third example in this slide is critical and resilient infrastructure. Here we're talking about some of the challenges that we saw in Texas, as a matter of fact, about a year ago when we had the catastrophic winter storm come through and take down much of the power grid. And so these are just meant to be 3-point examples of how we face a pivotal moment today as we look across our nation and as we look across society. And at the same time, we've been witnessing over the last decade or so sort of a changing science and engineering enterprise. That is to say that today, the pace of discovery across all fields of science and engineering have dramatically accelerated as a result of access to unprecedented amounts of data, as well as access to emerging technologies, whether it be artificial intelligence or machine learning or advanced sensing and wireless capabilities and so forth. We're also seeing that many of our earlier career researchers and students at the K through 12 level on up are much more interested today in going into science and engineering to be able to have a positive societal impact at the end of the day with the research, with the work, with the knowledge that they gain and that they're able to put to use. And then a third example, and again, these are meant to be illustrative as well. There are other ways in which the science and engineering enterprise is changing too. But a third example is that we see STEM talent today much more distributed across different sectors than I think we've ever seen. No longer is it the case that one gets a PhD, for example, and goes off and becomes a faculty member. Folks go off into industry. Folks go off into state and local governments. Folks go off into civil society. So there's an opportunity, we feel, to be able to sort of blend together that talent that exists across different sectors to really create diverse and meaningful partnerships that allow us to be able to address some of the societal challenges that we talked about on the previous slide. So another way of thinking about this, as Jeremy described the National Science Foundation at the outset, what we're talking about here is very much aligned with NSF's mission, but with maybe one key or prominent emphasis that we want to highlight. So today, a lot of the work that we support tends to be largely investigator driven. That is, it's largely driven by researchers in academia. And oftentimes, it's primarily the academic teams that are submitting proposals to the foundation. We have seen the enormous benefit of that over the course of the last 70 years of NSF's existence, with lots and lots of discoveries that have improved America's prosperity, the resilience of the country, the quality of life that we all have on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, though, we're seeing increasingly the value add of the users, the beneficiaries, the consumers of research actually being engaged in shaping and conducting the research. I'm talking about trying to bring together teams of researchers to be able to span academia, industry, government, civil society, and communities of practice to address important national or societal challenges and opportunities that we see on the horizon as well. So in some sense, this is a bit of a paradigm shift, but one that has always been a part of NSF's mission and just something that we're highlighting more and more of. That is to say, no longer strictly about technology push. You do some great research and then try to push it out into the market, but increasingly more of a market or demand pull where we're encouraging, again, the consumers and the beneficiaries of research to engage and help shape the design of research activities to then be interested in extracting out the insights for net positive gain to society. So as part of that sort of paradigm shift, I think it's imperative for us to really think about ways in which we can design programs that allow us to, as part of that second pillar, really enable opportunity everywhere and for anyone, regardless of background, regardless of organizational affiliation, and so forth. This slide illustrates the diversity of the science and engineering workforce that we see today, and also in the individual people, if you will, who are not shaded, the diversity that's additionally needed if we want the science and engineering workforce to be representative of the anticipated US population by the year 2030, just 8 years from now. And so we're trying to take meaningful steps to be able to ensure that we make headway in that regard. One example of this is a program that we call the Community College Innovation Challenge, or CCIC. This is a program that we've run for several years now, where the goal really is, it's an annual competition to really try to strengthen the entrepreneurial mindset, the entrepreneurial thinking among community college students by challenging community college students to develop STEM-based solutions to real-world problems. NSF has for many, many years supported four-year colleges and universities, but we increasingly recognize that there's a huge untapped and rich resource that exists at community colleges all across the country in terms of the talent base that we can really be able to support as folks pursue degrees and then eventually go on to getting higher degrees of education, as well as go on into industry too. As an example of something in this space, so these are the awards that were announced this past year, and the third place prize went to the Austin Community College. Where the project really was about a team developing a data analytics system for police departments. So using artificial intelligence techniques to sort data quickly to match officers' certifications and aptitudes with the needs of 911 callers on the fly. Another program that I think is very relevant here is something that we call PREM. And the goal of this program, Partnerships for Research and Education in Materials, PREM, is really to be able to support collaborative teams of researchers to advance the frontiers of materials science. And here, a particular goal is to be able to bring together minority serving institutions, whether they are historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, or tribal colleges and universities, bringing together MSIs with teams of researchers whom NSF may already be supporting to really be able to, again, create pathways for students who have traditionally been underrepresented in STEM fields and in the materials field in this particular case, to create pathways for them to not only have access to cutting edge research and education, but really provide them with opportunities to engage, and then potentially even beyond that engagement during their educational experiences, pursue pathways to successful and rewarding careers in materials research beyond that time horizon. And you can see here a number of awards that encompass the state of Texas, as well as distributed geographically across the rest of the country. A third activity that I'll highlight in the context of really trying to enable opportunity everywhere is a program called Civic Innovation Challenge, or Civic for short. This is an effort that we started a couple of years ago now, and we've run one competition. And as a matter of fact, we just in the last week or so announced the next funding opportunity for the Civic Innovation Challenge. Here, the goal is to really try to bring together local communities and civil society with researchers to be able to facilitate the kind of teaming arrangements that you need, as well as the kind of co-design, as we call it, co-design or co-creation that you need to enable solutions to community-centric problems that we see across the country. So in the first cohort of the Civic Innovation Challenge, we funded initially about 52 teams that were in phase one. And then those teams had an initial set of support from NSF, relatively modest amount of support for a large number of teams who went through a cohort effort where they received training along the way as they thought about how they were going to pursue the research that they were doing, how they were going to work collaboratively as a team, and then ultimately selected down to a subset of awards in stage two. You can see the numbers on the bottom right here, where we ultimately funded about 17 stage two awards. So a smaller number of awards in stage two, but larger research grants in each of those cases. And again, the goal in the first cohort was to be able to seek out solutions to some of the mobility challenges that we face in cities and communities across the country. For example, people's jobs are not where they live and vice versa, and that engenders some of the transportation challenges that we have and inequities that are created. So what are some approaches that we can take to address those? And secondly, I think many communities across the country are grappling with disasters, natural disasters in particular, and how you can better equip your community to be resilient to disasters or to be prepared to mitigate and respond to disasters on the fly. And so another illustration here of an effort to really try to broaden participation and bring those local communities and stakeholders in those communities into the fold as we talk about research-based solutions to some of the challenges that they are facing. And you can see the distribution of awards and the teams that received them here, including some of the local community organizations like MARTA that received an award in Atlanta. And then another program that I'll just highlight here is, and this one is maybe more in the space of advancing science and technology to address national needs, as well as sustaining and enhancing our global competitiveness, but still has that connectivity back to individual towns and communities across the US, is a program called the National AI Research Institutes Program. This is something that we started in 2019. We made the first set of awards in 2020, and then another set of awards in 2021. Altogether, we funded 18 awards across the country. So you can see the 2020 awards highlighted here and the states that they encompass. So we've made 7 awards in 2020 as an example, but we strongly encourage teaming as part of the proposals that came in. That is to say, we wanted academic researchers partnering with state and local governments. We wanted folks partnering with private industry, as well as nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, to be able to surface both the foundational research challenges in artificial intelligence. So for example, how do we innovate when it comes to knowledge representation or machine learning or reasoning or planning? How do we innovate in terms of computer vision, which is a key area in the AI space? as well as in the more use-inspired aspects of artificial intelligence research. So how do we, for instance, bring AI to bear in the context of food systems or agriculture? How do we change the game when it comes to food production and food delivery by virtue of the introduction of AI techniques to be able to address some of the foremost challenges that we see in that space? Likewise, in the education arena, how do we engender teaming between AI systems and students to optimize and personalize education and really help prepare students for jobs of the future? So in this way, though we made 7 awards, we ended up with over 100 different organizations across the country that were involved in those 7 awards. And you can see the footprint in the darker blue here on this map in terms of the geographic coverage of that first round of awards. And I'll just highlight the second round of awards briefly as well, again, covering that breadth of foundational to more use-inspired aspects of artificial intelligence and really expanding upon the geography to the point that we now have more than 40 jurisdictions across the country that are being served by an AI research institute, or even in some cases, multiple AI research institutes as well. A couple more programs that I'll highlight in the sort of advancing science and tech space, because they are really of the type that they're very locally oriented, but have the potential for national impact and global competitiveness more generally for the US. One is a program called Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, or POWER. And our goal with this effort is really around trying to be able to stand up a set of almost city-scale test beds distributed across the country that would allow for folks to be able to experiment with new wireless devices, techniques, protocols, applications, and services, really the spectrum of wireless connectivity and what it might look like into the future. So we've all heard about 5G and some of the more recent political issues around 5G and the deployment of 5G, but we're really focused on thinking beyond 5G to the 6th generation of wireless, or the nth generation of wireless. And as we do that, we have over the course of the last several years launched 4 of these test beds across the country: in Salt Lake, in West Harlem, New York, in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Ames, Iowa, and really covering both the fundamental aspects that underlie future wireless networks, like software-defined networks, for instance, as well as more of the application-oriented aspects. As we stand up these future wireless networks, how are they going to allow us to be able to provide coverage for unmanned aerial vehicles in a safe and robust and trustworthy manner? How are they going to help us be able to expand broadband access and connectivity to folks all across the country? This is a $100 million partnership that NSF has, public-private, that brings in $50 million of resources from 35 companies and associations across the country to help support the innovation that we want to see and the standing up of these test beds. And now we're going back and really trying to encourage researchers and communities across the country to be able to leverage those test beds. So how can you, now that we are standing up these resources, conduct experiments in the wild? So at that city scale, not just in a laboratory, not just in a more contained space, but how do you do it on this test bed to be able to really, for example, explore issues around security and resilience requirements for public networks that could be deployed into the future. And so this is an effort that we're doing in collaboration actually with the Department of Defense's Office of the Undersecretary for R&E to be able to advance 5G infrastructure, and in the process really think about what the future infrastructure might look like when it comes to wireless connectivity. And then the final, I think, emphasis program, if you will, that I'll highlight is something that is not yet a program by name, if you will. We have not yet launched it per se, but it's something that we've talked about in the most recent President's budget request for FY22. And I think many folks may know Congress is currently in the process of working through FY22 appropriations, so we'll see where things land. But this is a concept around really trying to accelerate regional scale innovation across the country. So if we think about some of the societal challenges that I talked about at the outset, climate change, equity, critical and resilient infrastructure, and we also think about some of the key technology areas for our country today, AI, advanced manufacturing, advanced wireless, and so on. There's this sort of bidirectionality that exists between those key technology areas and those societal challenges. That is to say, as we think about advances in AI, for example, that those advances help us think about new ways of solving some of the equity challenges that we face. And as we face these equity challenges, those give us new lenses into some of the needs that we have in AI or in sensing and wireless and networking connectivity that could help mitigate some of those challenges as well. So our goal with this notion of regional innovation accelerators, as we've called it in the President's budget request, is really to be able to try to bring together scientific and technological goals in AI and wireless and biotechnology and so forth with societal challenges, whether it be access to water or access to broadband connectivity or transportation woes that we face and so forth. And I think one of the advantages of thinking about this on a regional basis is that you find the challenges that we talk about really variable from the West Coast to the South, to the Midwest, to the Northeast, to the Southeast, and so on. And so really trying to be able to balance both technical innovation as well as geographic innovation to be able to spur the breakthroughs that will drive our future and drive competitiveness for our future as well. So the RIAs, NSF has a broad range of programs, some from very small awards at the scale of a few $100,000 over multiple years to at the scale of potentially $50 or $60 million over a 5 to 10 year horizon. In this particular case, we're imagining a scale that's even greater, maybe an order of magnitude larger, but that allows us to be able to thoroughly engage folks from diverse backgrounds in co-design and co-creation of solutions, and ultimately in the ability to be able to create pathways for regional scale development. So we're really looking here for being able to think about how can we bring together large and diverse teams at the individual level, at the organizational level, at the geographic level? How can we engender active participation of those team members? And how can we sort of create a culture that's really promulgating new technologies, innovation, entrepreneurship, the translation of those technologies into societal benefit? And that might mean new startups and small businesses. It might also mean solutions to some of the local government challenges that we've talked about in some of the other programmatics. I think a key piece here is training the next generation workforce. And I'm not just talking about PhD trained talent that NSF is often associated with, but also thinking about practitioners, technicians, and others, folks at all levels, making sure that everyone is really being equipped with the needs and the skills that are necessary to be successful in the years to come. So another way of thinking about these regional innovation accelerators, and as we want to expand innovation throughout the U.S., is to give you a few examples of what some innovation ecosystems look like today. So in the Mid-Atlantic, in Pittsburgh, for example, some of you are probably well aware of the robotics industry that is congregated there around Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh. In Nashville, Tennessee, we've seen over the last many years the medical device industry coming together around hospitals that are located there, as well as the university, to really create an ecosystem that's driving forward in terms of medical care innovation. Chattanooga, Tennessee is home to an electric power board, EPB, and the EPB has laid out gigabit fiber and really cultivated a gig economy in the city of Chattanooga and the surrounding community therein. And then finally in Huntsville, Alabama, I think many of you are aware of the military base, the Air Force base located there, and the industry, the defense industry that's congregated around that. So we have these sorts of point examples that exist across the country, and there are others as well that you may be very familiar with. I think the question that we ask with the regional innovation accelerators is there an opportunity for us with significant NSF investment, appropriated by Congress, of course, with significant NSF investment to really have that serve as a magnet that attracts in co-investment and co-creation from industry, from local communities, from states, from nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, from civil society, to really be able to cultivate these innovation ecosystems regionally distributed all across the country. So I hope that gives you a flavor for how we're thinking about this notion of, NSF has for many, many years now really supported investigator-driven science, academic research teams, really try to encourage discoveries that improve prosperity, resilience, quality of life, and so on. But do we have an opportunity to be able to sort of advance even further another part of NSF's mission, which is around more use-inspired science, trying to bring together multi-sector teams and really trying to focus in on specific national or societal or economic problems that we face today to be able to drive research pursuits and research results that can have impact. So with that, we'll pause. I hope that this has been an informative conversation, and we're really excited about sort of the directions that NSF is going in, and look forward to your engagement in the activities that we're trying to launch, as well as your engagement in really advancing the frontiers of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, research, and education for the country and for the world. So we'll pause, and I think Jeremy and I are around for at least another 15 minutes or so to take your questions. And if it's all right, I'm going to stop sharing my slides.
Yes, awesome. So thank you so much, Erwin and Jeremy, for that very educational and very useful presentation with all that wonderful information. So at this time, if you all have any questions, please go ahead and submit them into the Q&A, and we will be answering, we will be reading those questions and answering them. So one of the questions we have as of now is, thank you for all of this great information. You mentioned opportunities to serve as a proposal reviewer. How does one apply or sign up for that?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start with that one, Erwin. Feel free to jump in. One of the things NSF does not have is like a central intake form for this. So what you want to do is you want to go to the NSF website. You want to look for the discipline that is most closely aligned with your expertise, and see the program officers, the NSF program officers that are responsible for that discipline in NSF. Contact them. Some program officers, prefer different methods of communication. Some are okay with the phone. Others are better with email. It's probably better to start with an email and maybe attach a brief CV to that email. If you don't hear back right away, continue to follow up with that program officer. And it may be that there's more than one program officer in that specific discipline, and you don't need to just focus on just one, but that'd be my advice. I don't know, Erwin, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that's very well said, Jeremy. I think that, our program officers are always looking for talent, expertise that can serve on these panels, and they are busy, right? We're all busy. So please don't hesitate to ping folks multiple times, but they will get back to you, and they are eager to have your service on these and your expertise on these panels.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me see if we have another question.
That I'm going to drop into the chat just a link to a number of resources that my office puts together, and this includes these are kind of on-demand resources. So they're discussions like the one we're having today, but they may also be like a panel discussion that we held in November that covers the entire proposal preparation process or the merit review process. And then there are directorate specific, discipline specific presentations as well. So that's just that I just dropped into the chat. You'll see that there's a link to that, and there's a lot of good information there for folks.
Perfect. Yes, that's very helpful. I was going to mention that NSF also has newsletters that are very informative as well. So if folks would like to register or subscribe to those newsletters as well, I'm not sure, would that be found in this resource center?
No. So what you want to do is on the NSF homepage on nsf.gov, there's a section that says something, I guess I could look at it now. It says connect with us or follow us, and if there are different ways that you can do that, and you can just click on sign up for updates And then you can choose the type of information that you're interested in seeing. And you can decide, do you want to get this information daily? Do you want it as a digest? There it is right there. Thanks, Erwin. And you can kind of customize the information that you want to get.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes. So we don't have any additional questions, but again, really wanting to thank you so much for your time and all of this information. As a reminder to our attendees, this session has been recorded, so I will be sharing we will be uploading this to YouTube and sharing this video with you all. And if you have any follow-up questions regarding the webinar, you can send them to me. I'm going to type in my email, and if I don't have the answer, I can reach out to our presenters or contacts at NSF and submit those questions. If you don't
Absolutely. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you may think of later.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. And Lizette,
and there is my email in the chat.
Thanks for having us this afternoon. It's great to be with you all.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. And yes, if no further questions, that concludes the webinar for today. So thank you all so much for joining, and to our presenters again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.